Welcome to the Private School Leader Podcast, where private school leaders learn how to thrive and not just survive as they serve and lead their schools. I strongly believe that it is possible to have a long and happy and fulfilling career as a private school leader. And my passion is to help you figure out exactly how to do just that, right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And I'm your host, Mark Minkus. So I remember it very, very clearly. It was several years ago, but I was sitting across the table in my office from the mom of a sixth grade boy, and she said, looked me in the eyes, and she said, if you don't put my son into sixth grade pre-algebra, then I'm going to pull both of our kids out of the school. And then she just paused and waited. And I could feel inside of me my heart rate start to go up and my blood pressure start to go up and, feel this kind of sick feeling in my stomach. And so do I tell her no and risk having her pull her children out of the school? Do I tell her yes and then have to go and face my math teachers who did all the year-end assessments at the end of fifth grade to determine which kids should be in Math 6 and which ones should be in Pre-Algebra 6? I wish that I could say that I handled this ultimatum well, that I handled this threat well throughout my career. And I would say early in my career, I really didn't. I gave in to the fear of the emotion of the moment. But most of you listening, you've probably had a meeting like this in your time as a private school leader. And if you've been lucky enough to not have had this meeting yet, you probably will. But I want to help, because on today's episode of the Private School Leader Podcast, we are going to discuss what to do when a parent says, if you don't blank, if you don't do this thing, then I'm going to pull my kid out of the school. And so, since we're talking about parents, I have a question for you. Are the parents at your school getting more demanding and more intense more often? Dealing with parents is part of the job as a private school leader, but very quickly, dealing with private school parents can lead to stress and anxiety and feeling overwhelmed. And that's how I used to feel all the time. And that's why I created Parent Academy. So now you have a step-by-step framework that will help you go from feeling stressed out and anxious to feeling confident and calm when you work with the parents at your school. And over the last 33 years, I've built successful relationships with thousands of parents, and I've packaged that knowledge into an online course. And the first 4 modules are for you as the school leader. But then after that, I teach what I teach you, then I teach to your teachers in 2 45-minute plug-and-play PD webinars. And probably about 20 schools during this past summer use them for their back-to-school teacher in-service. And the feedback was really good about a paradigm shift and about how this has just been a game changer for them. And so I just want to help you. I want to help your teachers. And the way that you can learn more is to go to theprivateschoolleader.com/parentacademy. And like I said, it's 4 modules for you, 2 plug-and-play PDs for your teachers. Take everything that I learned, put it into an online course for you so that you don't have to feel the way that I felt for all those years. I want you to feel confident and calm and not stressed out and anxious all the time. So privateschoolleader.com/parentacademy. And then since we're talking about parents, I want to give you a free gift. And actually, I'm going to refer to this gift during the episode. And this is called the 7 Steps to Having Successful Meetings with Upset Parents. And this guide is an 11-page PDF. And it gives you a step-by-step plan to have better meetings with the parents at your school. I think that every good coach has a game plan, every good teacher has a lesson plan, but too many private school leaders don't have a plan when they sit down to meet with an upset parent. Well, now you have a plan, and you can grab this free guide at theprivateschoolleader.com/meeting. Theprivateschoolleader.com/meeting, a free gift to you, a PDF called The 7 Steps to Having Successful Meetings with Upset Parents. Okay, so I shared with you at the top of the episode this meeting that I had with this mom who was demanding that I put her kid into the advanced math class or she was going to pull her 2 kids out of the school. And, I think of the word threat. I think of the word demands. I think of the word ultimatum. And I think of how many of those I've actually heard during my 33 years as a private school leader. Switch my son's teacher or we are out of here. When those class lists come out and the parents find out who their teacher is and whether they're in the class with their best friend or not, and then you get that phone call, you get that email with the capital letters and the exclamation points. I've also heard this. I wonder if you've heard this. Well, we're not paying this much tuition for our daughter to be sitting on the bench. And if she doesn't get more playing time, we're just going to go to another school. Okay? Another one that I've heard is if you don't discipline the bully, we're leaving. And really what they're saying is if you don't discipline this kid, whether he's a bully or not, we know how that word gets thrown around, the word bully. But really what they're saying is if you don't discipline this kid or keep this kid away from my child, then we're going to leave the school. We're going to threaten you with leaving the school. And one more that I wrote down was, if my daughter doesn't get the class schedule that she wants, we'll take her to a school that will actually listen to us. I've heard all of those. And so I want to acknowledge a few things. First of all, I think that it's super important for you to hear that of all the things that I've faced in my career, and, whether that's the August apology from a teacher who resigns the day before the first day of school, or it's student discipline with suspensions and expulsions, or, vandalism or budget crises, enrollment crises, all the different things, that I would say that one of the most difficult situations that I faced again and again during my career was when a parent would say, either you do this, you do blank, or we're going to pull our kids out of the school. I really believe and really feel personally that was those ultimatums, those demands, those threats, as far as the reaction it would cause in me, the emotional reaction, and then the fallout, were some of the most difficult, awful things that I dealt with. And so I just want to put that out there. We're talking about, I'm talking about my career. I'm not talking about a year or a meeting. I'm saying these are really, really difficult when these happen. And I also want to acknowledge that not all demands are created equal. And so what I mean by that, I'll elaborate. We do a little bit of decision calculus. So what do I mean by decision calculus? Okay, well, is this a board member that's saying this? Is this child the grandchild of a big donor at the school? Is it the child of one of my teachers that's a key teacher in my school that's been there for 10 years? We do a little decision calculus, even though we shouldn't, about who's the child and who's the parent, who's the grandparent. Like I said, not all threats are created equal. And also, some demands are more reasonable than others. So, for example, the demand that my kid is going into this advanced math class or else, and the kid is a really low-performing student, versus someone asking for a class change for homeroom when they're assigned to the same class that there's this other kid that's been covertly picking on their child for a couple years, and you've been frustrated because you've been trying to deal with it. That one, I'm not saying you're going to change it, but I'm saying that one's a little more reasonable than the, lowest performing math student, the parent freaking out because they want them in the advanced math class. So not all demands are created equal. And one last example of that is, are you functioning from a position of strength with enrollment, or are you functioning from a position of weakness? So in my 21 years as a head of school, I had an enrollment in my pre-K through 12 school of anywhere from 225 students. Our highest was 502 students. So I can tell you, when we had 225 kids and we're barely scraping by to figure out how to keep the lights on and how to make payroll, it feels a little different when someone with 2 kids says we're pulling our kids out if you don't do this. But when I had 502 kids in the school and we were bursting at the seams, then I was like, okay, see ya. So sometimes the way we approach this has to do with whether we're functioning from a position of strength or weakness when it comes to enrollment. Now, that's a mixed bag of feelings right there, okay? And before I get into some strategies that are going to help with this, I just want to take a minute and answer the question, why do parents feel like it's okay to make these threats? Why do parents feel like it's okay to do this? Well, the first is because of it's the age of outrage. And I did an episode on that. I'll link it in the show notes at theprivateschoolleader.com/episode 153. And it's just about this immediate and disproportionate emotional reaction. It's like a little stone thrown into a pond that creates a huge splash. It's parents that go from 0 to 1,000 in 2.2 seconds, and they blow past all the stop signs of, social niceties and civility. So why do parents feel like it's okay to make these threats? In American culture today, we're living in the age of outrage. And you can listen to that episode if you want to and get more background on that. And also I gave you some strategies of how to deal with that. Another reason that parents think it's okay to threaten, that's what they're doing. They're threatening us. You better do this or else. Well, what's the or else? Or we're leaving. We're pulling our kids out. We're out of here. Okay? Now, it's a whole nother matter of whether they're actually going to go or not. I'll get to that in a minute. But the threat is made. And it still, honestly, makes me shake my head in amazement that this still happens. And it does still happen. And it's going to continue to happen. Okay? It's probably happening now more than it did 10 years ago, 15 years ago. At least that's certainly true for me. So why do parents feel like it's okay to make these threats? Another reason is because it works for them in other spaces. So if they act a certain way at a restaurant or at a country club or at the mechanic repair place or in some other space, and that acting that way gets them the result that they want, then they think it's okay to act that way when it comes to the school. And that leads me to the next reason that they act that way sometimes. And they, again, we're talking about a small percentage of your parents at your school that would ever even speak these words. But if even 5% of your parents would speak these words, then this is something that we need to talk about and figure out what to do about it, okay? But another reason that some parents feel like it's okay to make these threats is because of a consumer mentality. They see themselves as a customer, not a client. They see this as very transactional relationship, as in, I send you tuition dollars. I want to have some say in these outcomes. And that's very complicated because we do want to provide client service, and client service is about a relationship, but client service doesn't mean that they can call the shots. Another thing that happens in our schools that causes parents to feel emboldened to be able to do this is what I'll call social leverage. So some of our schools are like small towns. They're these little tight-knit communities, whether it's a church school or not. Sometimes it's even more that way with a church school because almost everybody also goes to the church, and you don't just see them 5 days a week. You see them maybe on Wednesday night and on Sunday morning also. But some parents believe that their influence, maybe it's financial influence or social influence or whatever, that it gives them some sort of leg up when it comes to bargaining, and that this is a negotiation and that they can like say what they want and they're actually going to get it. And the final reason that I have for why some parents feel like it's okay to make these threats is because of precedent. Parents know what happens at the school with other parents. And so if we've said yes as a school, maybe it was your predecessor. Maybe you're head of school that's been there 3 years. And 5 years ago, your predecessor said, okay, I'll put him in the math class. Then parents know that. You know, this might be the younger sibling of the parent who made that demand and was told yes 5 years ago. So you can be sure that a precedent, if it exists in your school organization, even if you weren't the one that said yes, that parents know about it, and then they feel like, well, the school said yes to that person, then they're going to say yes to me. So what we've talked about so far is just this idea of acknowledging some things about this threat, and then taking a look at why parents feel like it's okay to make this threat. And now I'm going to give you 4 strategies to prevent it from happening, and then 4 strategies to deal with after the threat has been made. So 8 strategies altogether. 4, I'm going to try and be preventative with them. And then 4 strategies, if the threat is made, what do we do? Okay? So 4 strategies to prevent it. Number 1, create clear policies and a clear process for parent complaints. Create clear policies and a clear process for parent complaints. Now, if you're multitasking, which I always encourage you to do, 8 strategies sounds like a lot. I want to help you. But if you're driving, if you're mowing the lawn, if you're walking the dog, you can come back to this. They'll be listed there for you in the show notes, theprivateschoolleader.com/episode 153. But I just want to acknowledge that 8 is a lot, but I want to give you as much help as I can. So, number 1, create clear policies and a clear process for parent complaints. We have to make sure that our handbook actually has a clearly stated procedure that when a parent has a complaint, they take this step, and then if that isn't satisfactory, then they go to this step, and then they go to that step. And usually it involves talking to the teacher first or to the coach directly first. And then if it isn't resolved there, then to involve an administrator who supervises that teacher. And then if that person is a division head, then it could get bucked up to the head of school and then probably eventually to the board. And so I'm not saying what your policy should be as far as the process for parent complaints. I'm just saying that you need a clearly stated procedure. If you'd have nothing and you don't even know where to begin, I think ChatGPT can give you an assist with that. Just write a really good prompt. There's a lot of handbooks of independent schools that exist in cyberspace, and obviously ChatGPT can pull from those. And then I'm not saying copy and paste that. By all means, just use it as your starting point if you have nothing. Okay, so create a clear policy and a clear process for parent complaints. Strategy number 2 to prevent this threat from happening is then to communicate the procedure clearly and often. So this parent complaint procedure that exists in your handbook, we're going to communicate it early, clearly, and often. So every year, first thing, that welcome back email. I just think that we say that, well, it's in the handbook, but do your parents have to go on a scavenger hunt to find the handbook? I'm not saying that you send a separate email and then through 36 font across the top that you say parent complaint policy, blah blah blah. No, it's part of your handbook, but I think we need to make, if we're going to refer to, well, that's in the handbook, we need to make our handbook easier to find. And so, for example, most schools do a weekly parent memo. I think it's a good idea to have kind of like a box. Most schools, they do it in Canva or something like that. You have like a text box, and you could have a link here for the family handbook, and maybe it's a link here for the athletic handbook, and here's a link for the sports medical forms, and here's a link for this, kind of like a one-stop shop that is in the same place each week, maybe at the bottom of the parent memo, so that it's easy to find. So early in the welcome back, here's the link to the handbook, and it doesn't hurt to say, and click here for the policy for parent complaints, however you want to do that. Make it easy to find. I suggest that it's a link in your weekly parent memo along with other links. And then on back to school night, you're mentioning it. Maybe you're talking to the president of the parent association and just reminding them that this is the procedure, this is the policy. So we're going to communicate the procedure clearly and often. All right, strategy number 3 for trying to prevent the threat from being made that if you don't do blank, I'm pulling my kids out of the school. Strategy number 3 is make sure that everyone follows this procedure. And in my script here, I have everyone in all caps. Make sure that everyone follows this procedure. So teachers need to follow the procedure. Board members need to follow this complaint procedure. If a board member is pulled aside at the soccer game, hey, I'm really upset about blah, blah, blah. The board member should be referring that person to the coach or the AD, or saying, have you spoken to the teacher yet? Or at least to say, well, you really need to call, Ms. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so, an administrator at the school. Board members can't be fielding complaints. We need to work with our board to understand that is not their role, to be the empathic listener and validate their feelings and acknowledge their concerns. That's the responsibility of the teacher, the school administrator, the AD. It is not the board member's responsibility. Board members need to redirect complaints to the administration of the school. Make sure that everyone follows this procedure. That includes coaches. That includes your athletic director. That includes division head. That includes the head of school or the principal. So parents coming in hot, head of school, they haven't spoken to the teacher. They haven't spoken to the division head. They're coming straight to you. Are you going to say, have you spoken to the teacher? Are you going to hold them to that? Or are you going to give audience to the upset parent who has bypassed 2 steps in the parent complaint procedure? So I'm not going to sit here and say that I've always pushed them back. Sometimes the parent says, no, I'm too upset. I can't talk to that person. It probably wouldn't go well. And I think, yeah, they're probably right. And so then maybe I have my teacher sit in on the meeting, or there's different ways to handle that. But again, I'm acknowledging that sometimes I didn't follow the procedure, and it would usually come back to bite me. And if we're getting everyone to follow this procedure that we have in our handbook clearly stated, again, we need to not just have the head of school push back, but when the parents don't want to follow the procedures, then whoever it is that is talking to that parent needs to redirect them to the policy. And then strategy number 4 for trying to prevent this threat from being made is to read the book Hopes and Fears. And I've talked about this before. Rob Evans, Michael Thompson. It's an NAIS book. I'll put the link in the show notes. I don't get it. I don't have an affiliate link for that. I don't get any affiliate income. I just want you to buy this book. You've heard me say before, I believe that this book should be on the desk of every private school leader in the world, and they should read it every year. It's like 150 pages, but it's gold because they know what they're talking about, and the strategies in there work, and it's a masterpiece. So I'll link to it. To the cheapest place you can buy it is right off the NAIS website. I think it's around $35, and I'll link it there. But read Hopes and Fears. especially the chapter on the 5%ers. And within the 5%ers, they talk about the intimidators, the anxious and incompetent, and the unresponsive. You can just focus on the part of that chapter about the intimidators, because obviously they're trying to intimidate you if they're threatening to pull their kids out of the school. And then I elaborate on that in episode 26 of this podcast, which is called How to Handle the 5% of Parents That Are Trying to Destroy Your School. It's actually the second most downloaded episode of all the episodes. And so I will link that in the show notes as well. Episode 26 kind of gives you a breakdown of that chapter. So if you're not going to buy the book, at least listen to that episode. I'm trying to equip you as much in advance as possible. So that moves us on to then the 4 strategies that we're going to use to deal with it in real time if the threat has been made. I need you better do this or I'm pulling my kids out of the school. Okay. Strategy number 1, ignore the threat and redirect to the process. Let me say that again. Ignore the threat and redirect to the process. So if it's me, when I got better at this, okay, I don't acknowledge it. I don't respond to it. I proceed as if it wasn't even said. I just interact with that parent as if they never said those words. I ignore the threat and I redirect to the process. Here's our policy. Now, hear me out for a second. And I'm going to touch on this in strategy number 2. There's a right way and a wrong way to do this, as far as if they're coming in hot and they're saying, I better get this and blah, 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 or I'm going to pull my kid out of the school. And then you're just like, okay, well, tell me more about the situation. And then you just listen and they talk, and you don't interrupt. And then when you do open your mouth, you respond with acknowledging their concern and validating their feelings. That's the right way to do it. So my point is not that you're going to talk over them, interrupt, and hold up a piece of paper and say, well, our policy is blah, blah, blah. That's not helpful. Okay. What we need to do is pause and respond. We're going to respond, not react. When we hear that threat, everything inside of us wants to respond, or react, I should say, to that threat. What I've found to be most useful is to combine strategy number 1 and strategy number 2. I'll tell you that in a second. Strategy number 1 is to just ignore the threat, redirect to the process, but just act like they never even said it. Don't acknowledge it. Don't respond to it. Oh no, we'd hate to see you leave, or blah, blah, blah. Well, you shouldn't be saying that. Just ignore the threat. Okay. And then number 2 is follow the 7 steps to have a successful meeting with an upset parent. And this is a PDF. I mentioned it before. There's 2 ways you can grab this. You can either go to the show notes at theprivateschoolleader.com/episode 153, or you can go to theprivateschoolleader.com/meeting. I don't care where you go to get it. I just want you to get this into your hands. It's like a 9-page PDF. 7 steps is a lot, but I'm telling you, if you follow these 7 steps, the pre-meeting, the beginning of the meeting, the part where they talk, the part where the first things that you say when it's your turn to talk, and then you acknowledge their concern and validate their feelings. You don't have to agree with them. And then you can redirect, and you quickly shift the focus to the future, and then sort of the wrapping up of the meeting. And then what do you do after the meeting? It's all in there. And so I'm telling you, that has worked for me for many, many years. It's worked for a ton of my clients, a ton of podcast listeners that have emailed me and said that they used the 7 steps and the meeting went so much better than they thought it was going to. And so again, follow the 7 steps to having a successful meeting. I really believe there's a right way and a wrong way to do this. And I'm not saying that this is the right way. I'm saying that this was the right way for me. And anecdotally, this is the right way that has worked for a bunch of people. And also, quite frankly, I've taken some of the stuff that I use in the 7 steps from Hopes and Fears, which I already told you is like the holy grail of books about private school parents. So we're going to ignore the threat, validate their feelings, acknowledge their concerns. You can grab that 7 steps, privateschoolleader.com/meeting or privateschoolleader.com episode 153. The third strategy, and then we'll wrap it up with the fourth one here real quick. The third strategy is to build trust with parents. And you're like, well, no, duh, I get it. Okay. How do I build trust with parents? I believe that competence leads to confidence. If you ever gotten on an airplane and the pilot looked like they were like 16 years old and you're just like, yikes. Okay. So there's an immediate perception of competence that affected your confidence in how that flight was going to go. So how do you demonstrate your competence that increases confidence and increases trust on the part of the parents? Do a good job. Do a really, really good job as you lead at your school. Okay? Building trust with parents is also about you being visible, you being friendly. And I know we have a lot of introverts listening, and I know we have a lot of people that hate small talk, and a lot of people who avoid interacting with parents because they see you, and then all of a sudden it's a proximity problem, and they're like, oh, yeah, and they never would have called, they never would have emailed you, but because they saw you at the third row of bleachers at the basketball game, they're like, well, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I get it. I understand. But we have to be visible and friendly, even if we're introverted, if we want to build trust with the parents. Just build that relationship. Make deposits in their emotional bank accounts. If there's something hard going on in their life, email them and check in on them. If you're a person of faith, email them and say that you're praying for them, if you're praying for them. And so making deposits in their emotional bank accounts, treating them like human beings, and first and parents second. I talk about with your employees. Psychological safety comes from treating your teachers like human beings first and employees second. That's true with your parents too. And then the final bullet that I have here under number 3 of build trust with parents is to keep your promises. If you say you're going to do something, we need to do it, because breaking promises completely destroys trust. And then strategy number 4, when we're dealing with this threat, is that we need to know when to say goodbye. Saying goodbye sometimes is the solution, because we can't continue. Okay. You know, the times when I put the kid in the advanced math class, then I got to go back to my teachers and be like, yeah, I know I had you do all those year-end assessments and compare the standardized test scores and give these recommendations and stuff, but they were mad. And so, this is what I did. Sticking to your guns, making them follow the procedure. If class lists are final and that's in your handbook, then class lists are final. Okay? If schedules are final and class placements especially with advanced classes, are final, then they're final. It erodes our integrity when we cave in to the parent that is the squeakiest wheel. And then here's the other problem. If you give a mouse a cookie, it wants a glass of milk. It's not just that parent that's going to come back with a more outrageous demand in the future. Now they're blowing up the parent text group and everybody knows. And so now you're going to have more parents that are going to be complaining about playing time or about all these other things that they want. And last time I checked, being a private school leader, it might feel this way. It is not our job to get the list of demands from the parents. Like, we want volunteers, not hostages in our school. Okay? From the parent standpoint, like, if they don't want to be there, there are other options. There are dozens of other options for them in their school, in their community, at the bricks and mortar, public school, private school, cyber school, homeschool. Your school is not the only option. If you say goodbye, it preserves your integrity. It shows your teachers that you have their backs. And here's the thing that I've learned over the years. Most of the time, it's an empty threat. And that is especially true if the child, at least one of their children, is in 4th grade or higher. Because 4th grade is when they really start caring about friends more than they care about pleasing the teacher. And if these kids have been in your school for a while and they have a close-knit group of friends, Here's what happens. And this has happened many, many times, I stick to my guns and I say, I understand where you're coming from, but we're going to, leave this child in this class, or we're not going to do this or whatever. Okay, I'm saying no. All right, well, we're pulling our kids, blah, 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 blah. Okay. I'm really sorry to hear that. Hopefully you'll take some time to think about that. That's a big decision. Those are the kind of things I say. Here's what happens a lot of the time, especially if the kids are 4th grade or higher. They go home, their kid has a tantrum. I don't want to leave. My friends are there. Why would I want to go to this school across town where I don't know anybody? And then the next day, I don't hear from them, or I hear, well, we're going to see how it goes. Okay. So I'm not saying that it's an empty threat every time. I'm just saying that when the kids are in 4th grade and above, in my experience, most of the time it's an empty threat. So we just have to stay emotionally regulated when that threat happens. But one way to stay emotionally regulated is to have a plan. And I just gave you a plan. And so the big takeaways are the plan. 4 strategies to prevent it from happening in the first place. The threat that if you don't do this, I'm pulling my kids out of the school. Number 1, create clear policies and a clear process for parent complaints. Number 2, communicate that process for parent complaints clearly and often. Number 3, make sure that everyone's following this procedure. Number 4, read the book Hopes and Fears. And then 4 strategies to deal with it after the threat has been made. Number 1, ignore the threat and redirect to the process. Number 2, follow the 7 steps to have a successful meeting with upset parents. There's 2 ways you can grab that: theprivateschoolleader.com/episode 153, theprivateschoolleader.com/meeting. It's a free PDF for you to help you have successful meetings with upset parents, even the ones that aren't making a threat to pull their kids out of the school. It works with them too. Strategy number 3, build trust with parents proactively. And strategy number 4 is to know when to say goodbye. And the call to action for today's episode is take 15 minutes this week to assess your current parent complaint policy and then answer this question: how good of a job are we doing following this policy? And just to wrap it up, a quick reminder, again, we're talking about parents. Parent Academy, I think, could be a real game changer for you as a leader and also for your teachers. Go to theprivateschoolleader.com/parent academy to check that out. And then, I've given you several reminders about where you can find the 7 steps to having a successful meeting with an upset parent. I really appreciate you just taking some time out of your busy schedule to spend time here today listening to the podcast. I've been your host, Mark Minkus. I appreciate all the hard work you're doing for those lucky kids at your school. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you next time on the Private School Leader Podcast. And until then, always remember to serve first, lead second, and make a difference.